Greetings, everyone. This is Mike Reilly, the voice of Ironman. And this is the Old School Tri Show with my Kiwi mates Cameron Harper and Brian Ashby. The show that talks about all things triathlon, old and new. We're powered by IMNZ Foods, bringing you nutrition and good health from New Zealand's beef and lamb. Thanks for listening, everyone. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome along to another edition of the Old School Tri Show, brought to you by our great friends at IMNZ Foods. And today, Brian, well, 2022 was a very different race. No professionals, but very different in that we get an amateur winner.
We get an amateur winner, and this winner, well, not only did he win in Topol, but he went on to be the fastest ever amateur Ironman in the world, Dan Plews.
IMNZ Foods is proud to be the new naming partner of Ironman New Zealand, ensuring every stroke, pedal and stride is powered by the best nature has to offer. IMNZ Foods is on a mission to bring nutrition and good health from New Zealand's finest beef and lamb. IMNZ Foods, putting the iron in Ironman with New Zealand's finest beef and lamb. Visit anzcofoods.com/Ironman to find out more.
Well, first of all, Dan, when I look at your race records, your race history, and everything else, and an age group athlete going under 8 hours, we know you're Dr. Dan Plews, and we'll talk more about that. But did you ever contemplate being a professional athlete? Because you would have done exceptionally well, you would think.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I have that question many times. And I actually did race a little bit professionally once. I wouldn't say as a professional, I raced in the professional category, but that was when I was, because my background, I started doing triathlons when I was 9 years old, right? So I kind of always had this kind of idea that I wanted to be a professional, but I was very much into the Olympic distance. And I remember at the time when I was at my university, the coach there said, "Oh, you should try the long distance. You'll probably be," he thought I was more suited to that, but I didn't really want to have a bar of it at the time. But it just never. I went to because when I was and I moved out. I finished my masters. I did my masters in exercise physiology at Leeds. I moved over to Singapore, and when I was in Singapore, and I must have been mid-20s by that point, so 25-ish. I actually did a few pro races. I raced the Singapore 70.3 as a professional then, and I actually qualified for Clearwater. Back, that was like the very early days. I think it was one of the first ever Clearwater 70.3 world champs, and Craig Alexander won it by memory. But for one reason or another, I didn't go. And it's honestly, to this day, it's one of my biggest regrets I've had as an athlete. And I didn't go because I had to run a training camp for the company I was working for. But then, I moved to New Zealand, and then I did my PhD, and I worked for the rowing team. And at that point there, if you look at I only did my first Ironman in 2013, Ironman New Zealand, which is my first ever one. And I would kind of skip all the time because I kind of did 13, and then I think my next one was 15, and then I missed 16 because it was the Olympics, and I was, Olympic years I could never do because I was always away with the rowing team. And then I did, 17, and then 18. Yeah. So, by the time I'd done 18, my plan was always to kind of, I would, I guess retire would be a word, but like I didn't really plan to come back racing after that. So I only came back in 2022 when I turned 40. So it was never really something that I wanted to do. And by the time I guess the most logical time to turn professional would have been in 2018 after I broke the record in Kona for the age group. But I never planned to race again, so there was obviously I wouldn't be making much money.
So it sounds as though, you've had a lifetime of kind of wrestling your sport with academia.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just one of those things that it never really materialized really into anything professional. And I don't think I would have made a great living out of being a professional the way it panned out. The only way I think it may have changed is if I went into the longer distance and I really focused on it a bit earlier. I think perhaps then I might have made a bit more of being a professional, and maybe I could have jumped on something. But I have no regrets. Like, I did my, I think everything happens for a reason, and it's quite hard to like be in academia and travel a lot and race professionally, and it just, I guess I chose a career over the professional career.
And for you, Dan, you talked about your first triathlon at 9 years old. Sport was always a part of your life, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, my dad was a good cyclist, so he raced road racing, cycling time trials. He ran marathons. He started to run marathons in the end as well. So natural progression is obviously then you start doing triathlon. To this day, he still swims like a floating twig as a result. But yeah, and then yeah, my dad, because my dad was doing it, then you kind of do what your dad does, right? And you follow it. I did my first swim run event, which was I think it was like a 100-meter swim and a 1 mile run when I was 9 years old. Yeah, and that was kind of the start of it, really. And yeah, nationally, back then they had something in the UK called the Milk Series, which was like a series. It's like the Weetabix Tribe, but the UK version, the children's series. So you get out of the pool and the bike would be on a grass field outside the front, and you'd bomb around there and then run around the inside. And so I did that, really.
Just as you sort of work through, and this is and I look at progression, particularly like over the course of the years with your marathon times and so on. This is a question, one of the early episodes of the Old School Tri Show, we sort of put to Erin Baker, knowing how John Hellemans had worked with her back in the day, that she was kind of John's lab rat. Are you your own lab rat? Is that is that how it's worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're always tinkering and always experimenting. I mean, I think I always had a lot of help from Gordon Walker, who you probably know.
Yeah.
So Gordy was always in my corner, and he was always guiding me and giving me a lot of guidance, especially when I moved to Ironman, because I didn't really know that much about it, in 2013. And, and he helped me throughout my entire career, right until I went under 8 hours. So I've always had him as a bit of a guider, which has been amazing. But I think, you find a formula, and even if I look at the way that, if you look at Lisa Carrington, for example, I work closely with Lisa and Gordy and within the Women's Kayak program still. And when I look at all of her years, the training hasn't changed that much. It's just slight iterations on something that works. You just kind of you're not reiterating the wheel. You're just tinkering and changing things. And I think for me, I found a formula that worked for me, and I never really changed it. And I just kind of a few iterations and a few tinkers here and there, but I found just something that worked for me. I monitored a lot on myself as well. This was beyond what Gordy would have me doing, because I was kind of, measuring the lactates, using my heart rate variability, looking at the resting heart rates, and it was great. Yeah.
So when you get an athlete comes under your guidance, Dan, what's one of the first things you'll look at for them, whether it's a professional at the top of their game or just an age group back of the pack person that wants to improve on their times?
Yeah, the first thing we always do is, well, first we get them set up and kind of just look at the training history. But it's always a case of looking under the hood a little bit. So when I can, I'll always try and get them in an exercise physiology lab, because I always will try and get an understanding of what's, who they are as an athlete. I have an idea of what the determinants of success in Ironman triathlon are, which are probably different. Well, they will be different to Olympic distance, or, what makes someone good at Ironman is very different to what makes someone good at an Olympic distance or a sprint distance, or even a 70.3 for that matter. So I'll take a look at their physiology, and then almost do a performance gap analysis. And it's the exact same principles that you'd apply to almost any sport. We do that at rowing, we do that at kayak. You're just looking where the gaps lie. So, they might have a poor threshold, they might have poor economy, they might have a poor fat metabolism, they might have poor substrate utilization, and you kind of look at their whole physiological profile, and then you say, okay, the threshold at VT2 is good, but at VT1 it's way too low. So you kind of look at where you want to need to take the program to gradually progress. I mean, a prime example at the moment is I work with a Swiss athlete called Fabian Musin. He is a great VT1, terrible VT2. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment just to really. It's almost exclusively towards his first races, slowly but surely, like 3 threshold sessions a week, trying to bring up that kind of VT2 cycling power. So,
let's look at in terms of your own racing. Did you always sort of gravitate towards the longer distance? We note your first Ironman in 2013. Was that always going to be your strength, the longer distances?
Unknowingly to me, I think it always was. Yeah. I mean, I think when I look back growing up, I was always very good at doing longer rides. I don't think to this day I've ever bonked ever in my life. I've never had that feeling.
Yeah.
So when I used to go out riding with my dad, and I've never had that kind of feeling ever. So I think I was naturally quite good at going long. But I was never really on the cards. The reason when I first came to New Zealand, so I moved to New Zealand from Singapore in 2011, the year, and it was a year, remember when it absolutely poured with rain the whole day at Ironman New Zealand? It was 2011, wasn't it? Yeah.
And 12 was the shortened one.
Sorry?
2012 was a shortened one,
And 12, I was at the Olympics anyway. It was the Olympic year, so I don't think I went down to that. But yeah, I was there, and my PhD supervisor, Paul Lawson, did that race. So I went down to watch him, and I was like, yeah, this doesn't look that much fun. Yeah, I remember it very vividly. But Paul was really into his long distance triathlon. So my PhD supervisor, I was training with him for that event a lot, just because we lived close to one another. And then we got through 2012 Olympics, and he wanted to do it again in 2013. And that's when I said, well, I'll do it with you, and we trained together for it. So it was more. I think Paul's done by that point he'd done about 13 Ironman races. So he'd done a lot, and it was more that he was doing it. So I thought I'd jump on there too and do it with him. Yeah.
So for your first Ironman here in New Zealand, Dan, what was your expectation lining up on the day? I mean, obviously you know that you're fit, you're strong, you're a smart guy, but what's your expectation lining up first time?
Yeah, well, I wanted to break 9 hours. That was my aim. I didn't do it, but I remember that Paul was like, he goes, no, you're not going to break 9 hours. You need to curb your expectations. And I was like, I'm going to break 9 hours. What are you talking about? I'm like, I'm doing that. All I have to do is run this and swim this. I'm like, you know how it goes. But yeah, that was my aim. But I remember, I think I came second in my age group that year. And Rob Creasy beat me. But he only just beat me, and he'd done an Ironman before. So
and a good athlete with it.
And he's a good athlete, and he was at that point he was beating me nearly all the time anyway. So we'd race each other a lot, and I think it's one of those situations where he was kind of my nemesis, but I don't think he knew that I existed, kind of thing, Yeah. So yeah. But I remember very specifically because I had a pretty good that day. I had a pretty good swim, and then I went out way too hard at the start of the bike, and I remember almost catching to the back end of the pros at the start of the bike, and then the second lap I just died, absolutely died. And I remember crossing over with Paul Lawson, and I called him Prof, and I'm like, "Hey, Prof, look at me, look how good I am." And the next lap I was like, "Oh, went down."
Yeah, because it's interesting. You come back 2 years later, and I think in that debut in 2013, you'd smacked out a 3:22 marathon. You win your age group 2 years later, and you go sub 3 hours in the marathon. So that was the big sort of focus in the intervening time, was just getting that marathon experience and building in your run.
Yeah, I mean that was 2015, right?
Yeah,
that I came back, and that year I had a really bad bike mechanical. You probably saw my bike time was really slow because my pedal fell off. So because that evening it rained overnight quite badly, and my pedals, and I had the speed play pedals, and they got really stiff. and because of that, they weren't rotating. The actual axle didn't rotate. So when I pedaled, it unscrewed itself all the time. So so my pedal actually fell off, and I had to wait for the mechanic who had a pedal spanner, and then I had to do it really tight. So I lost a lot of time on the bike. But I remember I was so far behind, and I remember the last 40k of the bike, just everyone was starting to come back to me. So it was a very different experience, because the last 40k of the bike this time I was feeling quite strong, whereas 2 years ago, the last 40k of the bike I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. But the funny thing about leading to that race was I remember is that me and Bevan McKinnon were having a bit of a back and forth on who's going to win, and he was like, smack talking me, and I was smack talking him a little bit, and obviously he blitzed away on the bike, and I had that massive problem, and even to the point where we came out the swim that year side by side, and we came running up that slope, and I said to him, and so it begins, Bevan.
Awesome.
But then in that race, he blitzed me on the bike, and then he ended up cramping at the back end of the run, and I caught him with about maybe 2 miles to go, which was good for me, not so good for him.
I remember that day because Bevan was. I remember it really well because Bevan was on a flyer, wasn't he? And then he was running strong, and you were gaining on that run. But then and we were standing at the finish line, thinking, okay, well this, we're expecting to see Bevan, and then someone said, no, he's in the box, man. He's cramped really, really badly, and you were right there anyway, and came through to take the win. It was a heck of a day.
Yeah, it was good, and I mean that was the first time when I kind of realized I could run a marathon. Okay, and it's quite funny. Like when I look at my career as a triathlete, and I go riding with Cam Brown quite a lot. We ride almost every Wednesday together. We do a gravel ride out at Puhoy.
Yeah, you got your horrendous gravel sessions, yeah.
No. Yeah, and they're great. So we always have a great yarn, and he's got some old school stories of triathlon, which I love. But we were saying we felt like we were the same. Like when I was doing Olympic distance, I always felt like the running was my weakest, and it was a real problem. But when I moved to Ironman, it swapped. It came the opposite. My running became my strength, and it's such a nice feeling. Like to have the feeling of getting onto the run, knowing that you're going to hold people off, versus getting onto the run knowing that you've got a kind of a bit of a weapon inside you that you can close is quite a changer.
There's an old saying, Dan, about Ironman being greater than the sum of its parts, and you're kind of describing that in what you're saying, that it's not as easy as a swim, bike, and run. But what is we'd be here all day if you had to explain it technically, but what do you think is probably the number one trick to being able to run well in an Ironman race, or to run at your best?
I think many when it comes to Ironman, I often say that many athletes underestimate the power of being a good swimmer, and that's not necessarily a fast swimmer, but I think like the ability to get through 3.8k and it literally not even touch the sides is really important. And I think it's often underestimated, and often you hear, the swim's not that important for triathlon, but I think the carry-on effect is absolutely huge. If you come out the swim and you're and it's taken something out of you, then you're on your back foot immediately. So like fitness in the water, the ability to swim 3.8k as daily bread or butter makes a massive implication as to how the whole day will unfold. And I think that's something that's often overlooked. The next thing would be like specificity on the bike, like actual time at power in the position, like doing very long reps. I would often just do 100-kilometer time trials, for example, just above my Ironman power, like very specific. I remember Terenzo once said to me, this ain't a tour bus, and I think people often make training entertaining, and unfortunately it can't be that entertaining a lot of the time. It has to be long, it has to be mundane, it has to be the same, it has to be quite arduous. And I think if you're going out there and you're doing your track sessions with your mates and your criteriums on a Tuesday and thinking it's going to be improving your Ironman performance, it's just not. And then the last would be, if I think about the running, it's I really believe running off the bike is everything, and it's quite a funny area. It's quite a contentious area because you get some coaches who believe that running off the bike shouldn't be done, and some like me who think it's really everything. And at the end of the day, the principle of specificity is one of the main principles of training. And I would do nearly all my hard runs. I'd never do any fresh. I'd always do them under fatigue. I'd always do them off the bike, to the point of where really my flat, my basic run speed, if you look at my 5K, 10K times, they're not actually that quick comparatively to what I can do in an Ironman. And I do believe it's because I don't get tired. I just don't fatigue at the same rate as many others do. So I hold my form really well.
It's fascinating. That I think you've probably given us one of the greatest quotes ever on the Old School Tri Show. It's not a tour bus. Loving that one.
Not mine. I think it actually comes from John Ackland, not even Terenzo. So I don't think Terenzo can take it either.
we look at if we go through, you run 3:22 in 2013. I think you're about a 2:58 and 15. 2:55 marathon in 2017. You're first in your age group, and you broke into the top 10 overall there, and under the 9-hour mark as well. So I guess you didn't have the mechanical issues of 2 years before, so that would have been a pretty satisfying day to tick that one off.
Yeah, no mechanical issues, but there was a lot of wind.
Yeah.
Can you remember that year? It was it was really, really windy, and it was a headwind all the way back. It was a horrible day. But yeah, it was I think the first time I kind of strung together a kind of a 1, 2, 3. I remember waking up that morning and I just heard the shutters just banging up against the window, thinking, "Oh no, here we go."
Yeah, I remember that one too, because when Brian and I staying at the motel ahead of commentary, you wake up in the morning, first thing you listen for is waves lapping on the foreshore.
Yeah, there was definitely waves that year. It was really choppy. The water was super choppy.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Advanced it another year, and gosh, in 2017 you'd done an 8:54. In 2018, heavens above, you're really owning it at this stage. An 8:35 overall, okay, conditions and so on. A course record there for age groupers. You'd had a really good 70.3, I think, in the same year, and Kona and so on as well. So 2018, that whole year, just everything seemed to click for you at that point.
Yeah, it did. I mean, for a bit of context, in 2017, my plan was always to go and do Kona.
Yeah,
and try and. So I raced Kona in 2015, and I remember I finished, and I remember very specifically saying to my dad that I really believe I can win the age group overall in Kona. Look, I just looked at the times and what I did that day, and I had, I was away with the rowing team the whole year. I had terrible build. So 2017 was supposed to be going to be the year when I went to Kona and I had a good crack. But fortunately for us, we had a baby girl, so Kate was pregnant, and the due date was right on the time of Kona. So, and the funny thing was that in 2017, lots of my friends knew that my aim was to go to Kona, and it was like Kate was like 6 weeks pregnant, so we couldn't tell anyone at that point, and everyone was like, "Why isn't he taking his slot? What's going on? This is what's happening?" So anyway, the funny thing and in the end, Bella, my who's now my eldest, she was born the day of Kona. Literally the day of Kona. I remember, I was watching because I was coaching Terenzo then, and Terenzo came 6. I remember we were in the the newborn. Bella was the newborn, just still in hospital, and I was watching the race on my phone, seeing how Terenzo was going, which is pretty cool. So as a result, things got shifted, and then Kate, my wife, was like, "Well, you may as well, I'll support you to go and have another go in 2018." So. 2018 was a great year because I was coaching Terenzo. We did a lot of our training together, which was perfect for me. And like he was on a rampage as well. He was flying, so he was bringing me up. And I think everything kind of clicked really, really nicely because we just, we had great training partners, great camaraderie, and the fitness that was built up from the last few years had kind of started to come out. So
yeah, and we've talked about your marathon build and so on, but that year, like in Taupo, I think you swam like it might have been your quickest swim. I think you're sort of 50 or maybe a shade under 50 and so on. So that, you talked before about the run and your swim and your swim fitness and so on. That's kind of a really nice start for the year, isn't it? When your first stage of an Ironman and you smack out a swim like that.
Yeah, it was great. I crashed on the bike that year as well.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I had a bit of a spill. So unfortunately I didn't hurt myself, but I got back on and I managed to complete the run. But that was also pre-carbon shoes as well, even then. Because I remember I just got the carbon shoes for Kona in 2018, but I did that race in you're playing ASICS Deer trainers. So that run would have probably been a little bit quicker because the shoes do make a difference.
Yeah, they do. They make a heck of a difference. One of the, and it's interesting, sorry, Brian, I was just on a side note, innovations in sport. I mean, you know all about them, but that's been one heck of an innovation in the last period of time, isn't it? The carbon shoes.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, depending on the athlete, I think I was talking to a friend the other day, Pete Fitzsinger, who I don't know if you know who Pete Fitzsinger is. Yeah, so he lives just up the road, and we bump into each other, and we were talking about carbon shoes. And I think they make a bit of a bigger difference to the heavier athletes. I think if you're a smaller, lighter, more efficient runner, they probably make a bit less of a difference. But for triathletes who are generally heavier, they make a huge difference. Yeah, for sure. You're talking 5 to 10 seconds a K, perhaps.
Wow.
Tell us about your Kona build that year. You'd had a superb race in Taupo, an age group record there, and you were 9th overall. You go to Kona, and you're even quicker in Kona than you were. Okay, different courses and all those things, but what a remarkable day.
Yeah. I mean, that day was, I was very fortunate with that day in Kona because I think, three things came together very nicely. Is that I was exceptionally fit. I was probably the fittest I've ever been in my life. I had an amazing day, like when you just on, like, and you just feeling. I just felt amazing the whole day, and it was a very favourable day for Kona. So it was a very fast. It was a fast year. So yeah, I mean, I never expected to go as quick as that, to be honest. I just remember. I always remember that when you set out on the run, and I remember running back along the Queen K. And by that point, everyone's dying normally, right? And I was like, and I knew I had a 10-minute lead, and I was, and I kept running under 4-minute Ks all the time, even at that point. And I remember I ran down one bit, and I did a 3:45K, and this was like 9K to go. And I was like, oh, you should slow down, just slow down. You got it done now. Oh, just one more K. Just do one more K. One more K. So. But then finally, the last bit you get on the Queen K, and it got a little uphill to the Palani, and I ran up that hill, and that by then that got me. And then but by that point, you just have to run down Palani and around. But yeah, I mean, I would never. If someone had said to me that you can run a 250 in Kona, that would have blown my mind. I still to this day don't know how I managed to pull that out. Really,
I'm guessing you're a bit of a nutrition ninja based on that.
Yeah. I mean, depends who you ask. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm known for my kind of lesser carb approach to nutrition. I mean, even on that run, I took one gel, 50 grams of carbs per hour on the bike. So, which I think that's one of the reasons I went so well, because the stress of the heat really affects your carbohydrate oxidation. So I think it plays into your hands if you're a bit of a better fat burner, the hotter it gets. I do believe that there's some sort of chronic adaptation that goes on from living in Singapore for 4 years. Living in Southeast Asia for 4 years, I'm generally quite good in the heat. So still to this day, I can jump off the road. I took a group of my athletes to Kona last year on a training camp, and I can jump off the plane and I'm almost fine within a day. So I don't have a massively high sweat rate either. So there's a few things that play into my favor, but pretty. I mean, the Kona was pretty awesome, I have to say, and thankfully the record still stands. So
yeah.
What's it like?
So I was just going to say that record will acknowledge that 8:24:36. So that's incredible in Kona. Well done.
It's unbelievable. And what's it like to know when you're at the front of the age group race, and not just at the front, like you're dominating the race, and to think to yourself, I'm feeling pretty good, just like you're saying before, just one more K. You're running so well. You're almost at the end. I guess to be on the world's biggest Ironman stage and have the race come together, I mean, that's pretty special, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's funny. I mentioned like it's I mean the feelings don't get any better than that. You know, it's like it's one of those things where you have if you ever have the experience when you really build towards a goal and you achieve the goal, and you when you wake up the next morning, there's a small window of about 3 seconds where you can't remember whether it's a dream or it's true. You know, that's when you know you've really achieved something, or you've done something that you really, really striving towards. And I remember very specifically waking up in Kona the next morning and having that feeling. Yeah, and it was my daughter's first birthday the next day. So there you go. It was a year on. So.
Magic, absolute magic. There's a bit of a sort of a gap, I guess, between Ironmans after that point. We've got all sorts of things going on. I guess life's getting in the way for you a wee bit, maybe, and business and COVID and all of those things. But let's fast forward to 2022 and COVID year, and Ironman New Zealand is at the back end of the year because of COVID, and the whole dynamic of the day is a whole lot different. The pros aren't there, and also the weather is an absolute shocker. It was a bitterly cold, freezing, miserable day. What are your memories of that day?
Yeah, well, I remember I still got sunburn on that day somehow. Yeah, I do remember.
Must be the English heritage.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. But I remember because really after Kona in 2018, I kind of had plans to stop racing. So I didn't really actively pursue it. I grew my own business. I grew Endure IQ. I got more heavily into the coaching and still carried on with my academic work. And things were quite busy. And then I turned 40, and then Chelsea won Ironman Kona in October, and I turned 40, and then I was like, what do you want? And there was a little bit inside me that was like, I've never really done an Ironman on a fast course. So I wanted to kind of tick that box a little bit, is to try and do a very fast time, and sub 8 hours was the goal. So that's why I came back, really, because I felt like this real urge to, before my time was up, so to speak, and I was too old to do it, was to try and do a very fast Ironman time. And I managed to get an entry into Ironman New Zealand. And so I had a really short build into that race. I only really trained for 8 weeks. But obviously, I was already quite fit. Anyway, it's not like I was doing nothing at all, but I wasn't doing anything very specific around Ironman. I was still swimming 3 times a week and running and cycling, but I wasn't really very dialed with my training. So I did, an 8 week block, and I remember, I just remember that morning being studying, is it Jolly Goodfellas, the little pub by the race start, and just absolutely pouring with rain. I was thinking, oh no, this is going to be. Wish I was doing the 70.3 right now, and not the full. But you know what? It wasn't actually that bad. I remember, thankfully, it rained a bit on the bike, but it wasn't crazy bad. But on the run, there was some periods of time where it absolutely really rained very hard. But there was also periods of time when it was really hot. There was periods where it was mega humid. I remember running along the waterfront and just being really, really, really cooking. So, but yeah, I was very sore after that race. I just wasn't fit enough to really cope. But it was, I think I count my blessings because I was very fortunate to be able to win Ironman New Zealand and take the tape, right? And that was probably the only one time I would ever get to do it without being an age group only race. So it's pretty cool.
One thing I do remember from that day, is the lightning, and we wasn't lost on Brian or myself, the rest of the commentary team, that we're standing in aluminium scaffold towers for like everyone down for the towers. It was, it was a big day. It was a big day.
It was. I remember that day because I was chasing. I was in second the whole time on the bike chasing. There was one guy who was out in like the leader was out in like 47 minutes, and I remember like coming around the first lap, and I was biking quite well, and my dad gave me a time gap, and I had hardly closed on him. I was like, "What is going on?" Like, but thankfully he died on the second lap, so I managed to even split it. So, yeah,
pretty memorable day. That one certainly on a whole lot of different levels. Obviously the win for you, but also the conditions that everyone dealt with. And you alluded to wanting to get onto a fast course, and so you get this Ironman under your belt with a win, and in 2023, it's to California. You've found your fast course, and oh my, how you took advantage of that. Unbelievable. The sub 8 hour as an amateur, unbelievable.
Yeah, so the journey actually went in 2022. My original aim was to do Challenge Roth, which I did do. I did Challenge Roth, but about 4 weeks before, I got a really bad Achilles injury, and I couldn't run at all. So I lost a lot of fitness leading into the race. I managed to start running a week before, and I remember when I did start running, I had horrendous DOMs all the time. So I actually started the race with really sore legs already. I still ran a 250, but not. But it wasn't the day that I wanted it to be. And at that point, when I finished that race, I thought, oh, well, that's that done and dusted. That's not happening anymore. But then, you just recalibrate and reset. And I thought, well, what's another 6 weeks or another 8 weeks of training to try and find a fast course? So, I searched around. One of my Enduro IQ coaches suggested that California would be a good one to look at as a fast course. And that's the one I chose. And thankfully I had a great day there. I mean, I wouldn't say that was it wasn't like the perfect day. Like I would say Kona in 2018 was almost perfection. I don't think not any athlete who's watching or listening to this to actually have a race and go, I couldn't really do anything any different on that day is almost impossible. But that Kona in 2018 for me was almost that day. It was, I couldn't ask for anything different. But there was a few things in California that weren't ideal. One is it absolutely poured with rain, like really badly poured with rain. Like you wouldn't believe it. Like way worse than it was in New Zealand. The rivers, the roads were rivers. But yeah, that was I had another great day there. My last 10K of the run was my fastest 10K as well. So I kind of built into it, and that was pretty special.
And what was it like when you would have been getting time splits around there, Dan, around Ironman California, and as you're getting through the run and thinking, gee whiz, 8 hours is on here. Did that into your head at what point did that come into your head that gee whiz, I could go 8 hours here?
Yeah, you kind of know because you swim split, your bike time, right, and you kind of doing the maths in your head, and because I was staying with Chelsea Sodaro, so we were staying and she was watching, and I went past her and I said, what time do I have to run to run a 250? What time do I have to run to 8 hours? And she kind of did some maths and she said, you have to run the 250. So I was like, right, okay, and I just kind of worked away with that. So, and the run was actually long as well, unfortunately. Yeah, it was 42.8.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, but I still made it.
I could imagine the people on the finish line, the officials and everything. I mean, they would have known you're legitimate, right? You're going through the timing mats and everything, but it would have been a lot of people with blowing minds at that time up on the clock at the finish line.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, it's always nice. I think I'm a bit of a goal setter, and then when I have those goals in my head, and I think my wife probably annoys my wife a little bit to some extent, that I'm just very pig-headed with it. When I have that goal in my head, I'll really go after it. So and that was kind of always the aim of 2022.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Brian. Sorry, real quick. When you're at the front end of these, and I guess it doesn't matter where you are in a group when you're racing, but we all go through good patches and patches that aren't great. And you're saying earlier that you seem to be able to go at a high, consistent level for a long time. But what do you do if you're thinking to yourself, "Gee whiz, I'm not going through the greatest patch here," or does that just not really happen to you? Like, how do you recover out of a patch that isn't great and still stay at the top?
Yeah, I always talk to with the athletes that I coach. I do believe that there's certain periods in an Ironman that are always the hardest, and I think they're different for different people. But for me, the last 40K of the bike would be always where I would pay my most attention, because I felt that was always the hardest bit. So I would almost purposely focus on the last 40K of the bike and almost try and say, okay, hold yourself back until you got 40K to go, and then give it a good nudge. You can just step in it a little bit more. And I find that's quite a good race tactic as well, because I would often do the most power in the last 40K as a result of that, because I was always trying to hold back. But I think as an athlete, if you can earmark the bits where you're going to find it harder and almost make them your focal point, that's always great. And and on the marathon, for example, the hardest bit for me was 20 to 30K was always, that's a real struggle, because there's something about getting 10K to the finish. I mean, how many 10K training runs have you done? There's something mental that's easy about that. But when you're over halfway, you're really tired and you think, oh my God, I've got to do that again. And that 20, but once you get to, I always was thinking, once I get to 30 or 32K, I'll be okay. But it's just, so I would almost purposely focus on those points. But yeah, you also have to know that believe that everything is in ups and downs in Ironman. Sometimes you do feel good, you feel bad. It's just, you have to just go with the flow. The trick is to not let the bads think you're not the bad points. You can't let them take you on a spiral, right?
Nerd question here: when you did the 756 in California, where did you place overall that day in the field?
It was an age group only race.
Oh, it was age group only. Okay.
Yeah. And I won by 23 minutes.
Yeah. Heaps.
You must have the other guys, the other people in your age group must be going, oh, geez, Dan Plews is tuning up.
Maybe. Yeah, but I always had the aim of winning age groups overall. I never really thought about. I think that's the way you have to work it as well. I think in goal setting, if you aim to be in the top 3, you're going to get 5th. If you aim to win, you're going to get 3rd. You got to aim to do more than you're wanting to actually do. I mean, Gordon Walker taught me this. He said that when it comes to the women's K4, every time they would aim to get on the podium, they'd be 5th. You have to aim for more than that. You have to aim to, if you want to win, okay, win by how much? How much do you want to win by? You can't say I just want to win, because if your only aim is winning, you'll come 3rd. And I think that's always the mindset that I've always had. I've never aimed to win my age group in the 40-44. I'm like, no, I want to win all age groups. And that's kind of, I think you've got to shoot a bit higher than what you're actually aiming for, and then you'll probably end up in the right place.
It must be incredibly inspiring for you in your professional capacity, but also you become good mates with a lot of these people. But being associated with people like the New Zealand women's kayaking team, Dame Lisa Carrington and her colleagues, people like Terenzo Bozzoni, people like Chelsea Sodaro, I mean, it must be incredibly inspiring to be able to just work with them, but also, it must be also amazing looking at the mindsets of champions as to what makes them that bit better than the rest.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think that's something that, I think when you look at all champions, they're mainly, I mean, obviously everyone is a bit ego driven, ego orientated versus task orientated goals. So ego is I want to win a gold medal, whereas task orientated is more, I want to improve this or this. And I think nearly all of those people you mentioned, they obviously want to win, but everything's driven by more task orientated goals, and they have a lot of control over what they have control over, particularly when it comes, so that's like just the very small things of going to bed on time, your nutrition, doing all those small things right. I think, because I think often as athletes, you can get too, I mean, a lot of amateur athletes, they get too caught up on the things that they have no control over all of the time. It's like, I'm not genetically good enough, or I haven't been doing this for long enough, or, I didn't swim when I was younger. These things that you can't change. And I think that you can get too caught up on that. And the athletes who I work with or have had the privilege of being around, they just look at the small things that you can change to make the difference. And I think that's, in the end, it makes a massive difference. And it's the long game in these things. It's not the short game. And one of my favorite quotes is that people they overestimate what they can do in the short term, and they underestimate what they can do in the long term. And that is triathlon. That is triathlon training. You've got to think of a long-term goal. And even, when I did what I did in 2018, I've been doing triathlon since I was 9. And I actually set that goal in 2015, 3 years earlier. So you think about how that looks. You've got to play you definitely got to play more of the long game.
Mm-hmm. We've talked a lot about your athletic career, and you've mentioned names like Chelsea Sodaro and Terenzo, but gosh, the other people you've worked with, Javier Gomez, the Van Berkels, and so on, you seem to be able to collect some remarkable people from within the sport that we love. So, just has that just been through great networking as you've travelled around the world and met these people and so on? How have some of those sort of relationships formed?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate. I mean, and that's, I think as New Zealanders, they've got the Mahe Drysdales, the Eric Murrays, the Hamish Bonds as well, who have done a lot of work within the rowing sphere. Emirates Team New Zealand, Blair Tuke, Peter Burling, I've worked with them as well. And so I'm pretty privileged when I look at what I've worked with in terms of New Zealand sport. It's pretty amazing. But I don't hunt these people out. I think generally they find you. And I don't believe in, as a coach, I've never once approached an athlete ever. I don't think that's ever a good starting point. I think because a coach-athlete relationship is, at the end of the day, you're the boss, right? So they have to want to listen to what you have to say. And if you're the one who's going to find them, I believe that's always starting in at the wrong side of how the relationship should work. So yeah, I've been really fortunate to, I think I've obviously gained a lot from working around these types of people too.
Where do you see the sport sort of going, Dan? Just, we're seeing people now going sub 7:30 in Ironman. Chelsea, unbelievable performance at Ironman New Zealand a year or two ago. There was a time, even in Taupo, where we never thought we'd see anyone go under 8 hours, but it's almost become routine in the right conditions now. Where do you sort of see the sport, not necessarily landing, but just how fast can it get?
Yeah, I think things will calm down. I think like the jump from COVID to now is a lot. Like, I don't think we'll see that again. It's almost crazy amount a lot. I think, like, who knows why that is. I think innovation will probably play a part in that for sure, with the the aerodynamics and whatnot. But I think, like, I don't think we're going to see the point in time where we're going to see people continuously under 7 hours, for example. That's just not going to happen. But I think it's just going to get tighter at the top, and you're probably going to have a lot of people all finishing with it, because it won't. What happens in sport is that it goes to a certain point, and then everything gets tight. And that the next point of the evolution of the sport will be, you're going to have about 20 guys between 7:30 and 7:40. That's what's going to happen. I mean, and it's crazy. I mean, look at Ironman Texas that happened 2 weeks ago. Like, New Zealand's Matt Kerr, he went 7:57, 7:56, and came 15th. 15th.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, and a great race for him, an amazing race. But like, to get 15th at that, it's like you're not even in the prize money. I mean, this is the level now. So it's when you got people like who are running like 3:35s minutes per kilometers after cycling 45 kilometers an hour, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is. So what's you talk about goal setting. What's the current goal for you, Dan?
Since I've actually started doing high rocks now, and I'm quite enjoying that. So those who don't know, high rocks is like running with a fitness station, and I'm always a bit of a competitor, and I like to compete. And the main thing is I really enjoy the active lifestyle. So training for a goal is kind of how I have that in place, and I feel like everything else can circle well. That's what gives me a lot of momentum in life, is that if I don't have that, I don't really feel like other things work that well. So I'm heading to the High Rocks World Champs 14th of June. So I'm training pretty hard for that at the moment, which has been great. I had to get a bit stronger, put on a bit of weight, which has been nice. I looked at a picture of me the other day of when I was in my prime for Ironman. I couldn't believe how I look like a little schoolboy. So small. But yeah, it's been good. And I think it's been a good change, like getting a bit older, getting a bit stronger. It still has a huge endurance component because there's 8.7 kilometers of running in it. So you still have to run pretty good. There's ski erg, there's rowing erg. So, there's still a lot of endurance involved. So I'm aiming to hopefully win my age group at the High Rocks World Champs. That'll be the aim.
Fantastic. Well, Dan, it looks as though you're never gonna sit still, and I'm not sure whether it's sitting still or keeping your brain ticking over that keeps you motivated. But it's probably a combination of both. But look, we're incredibly grateful for your insights that you've given us today on the Old School Tri Show. Thank you for joining us, and all the very best with the High Rocks and the World Championships.
Thanks for having me on. It's been a blast.